Cross-cutting issues in education. Module overview. Education is not only a means of acquiring knowledge, power or wealth, or an exist route to improved living, but more importantly that of generating values, liberating the mind, impacting positively to society and the beginning of a lifetime contribution to humanity. Quality education empowers its beneficiaries towards national reconstruction, reconciliation, socio-economic development and restoration of human dignity, resulting in transformation of the society. In an effort to instill such values of education in students, teacher trainees need to be trained with the skills to break through the formidable ever-changing life challenges awaiting them. Beside the concrete professional skills, teachers trainees also need to have psychosocial skills that enable them to be resilient. Cross-cutting issues are issues that touch a number of different aspects of the society, on general principles such as democracy, human rights, good governance, children's rights, gender equality, population and family life education, poverty alleviation, environment and development, to mention but a few. Integrating cross-cutting issues into teaching makes the education we offer meaningful and relevant to the individual and the society at large. The integrative approach to teaching and learning is motivating, meaningful and above all empowering because it helps individuals develop action competence. Experience has shown that teachers as implementers face challenges in integrating cross-cutting issues into their teaching. For teachers to be able to integrate cross-cutting issues into their teaching, they need to be empowered both academically and professionally through pre-service and in-service courses. In order to ensure sustainable development, it has become vital to recognize the importance of those cross-cutting issues in education such as environmental protection, HIV/AIDS and gender, the two sexes, male and female, as complementary biological entities, and moreover, to respect full equity and equality of each of the two genders. In view of this, needless to say that teacher trainees need to be sensitized about gender issues. Similar to many African countries, here in our country Ethiopia also, though efforts are exerted to minimize the impact of cultural factors on gender, many things remain unsolved regarding the equality and equity of resources between male and female. Calling for further reaction. To this end, life skills education is aimed at facilitating the development of teacher trainee psychosocial skills that are required to deal with the demands and challenges of everyday life. Hence, teacher trainees are to be trained in all the skills essential to lead a successful life in the present competitive world. Of these important skills, life skills are important as they help them to develop concrete ways in which they could extend and improve in their ability to live with oneself, interpersonal skill, effective decision-making, and coping with stress, creativity and conflict management skills. This type of awareness of extending competence would enable teacher trainees to use and impart the skills among their students, and develop as a better citizen of the world. Module learning outcomes. After completion of the module, prospective primary school teachers are expected to know the basic cross-cutting issues included in the country's education policy, construct and implement life change strategies for personal growth, analyze their self-concept and demonstrate an increase in self-esteem, lead a successful life being competent in their future career, develop the skills of overcoming the life challenge they face in life, and even helps their students. Understanding the essence of gender. Appreciate and play their role in educating, empowering and minimizing the gender gap existing in Ethiopia through educating their students and the society at large. Play their role in protecting their environment. Unit 1, Gender in Education and Development, Understanding Gender and Related Concepts. Dear student, among those current hot issues, gender issue is currently accepted as one of the cornerstone issues of the modern social system over the world. This indicates that learning gender issue as a concept of the world issues can help you to realize the needs to addressing individual, social, economic and political injustices in the society in which women strongly suffered because of their gender. Some important concepts in gender. The following important concepts will clarify you the differences between men and women and how they, in most situations, were perceived in their society. 1. Sex and gender, what is the difference? Dear student, though many people often use the concept of sex and gender interchangeably, they are not the same thing. Currently, due to this misconception in many societies, men are to be privileged in all public spheres while women are excluded and prevented from getting their fair share due to their sex differences. So, in order to increase your understanding about the two concepts, it is better to treat them separately. Sex. According to Santrock, sex refers to the physical and biological differences between women and men in which they are given at birth, sometimes before birth, as female or male. This means it is generally assigned at birth by external genital appearance, due to the common assumption that this represents chromosomal or internal anatomic status. For example, men's physical feature and strength, genital organ is different from that of women. All these natural characteristics of differences are exclusively biological to an individual sex. Gender, according to Brett, gender denotes the socially constructed identity of women and men. It is ascribed to them on the basis of their sex. This means it is not something physical characteristics of human beings like sex, rather it is a set of characteristics, roles, and behavior patterns that distinguishes women from men socially and culturally and in relations of power between them. Similarly, according to Santrock, gender refers to the social differences which are learned, and can vary widely among societies and cultures, and change over time. Hence, gender is not simply a social category, but represents important psychological and social process which is also an important aspect of one's identity or sense of self. 2. Gender role and sex role. Dear student, can you explain the difference between sex role and gender role? Dear learner, this activity may take you back to realize why men and women perform different roles in your community. Like the concepts of gender and sex, many people often confused with the concept of sex role and gender role. But, though they may be related to one another, they are not the same thing. Thus, to develop common understanding on these terms, it is better to see the concept separately. Sex role is the biological function limited to a particular sex that is supposed to be performed naturally. Thus biologically men and women are differing in their sex role. For instance, men's sex role is to impregnate while women's sex role is conceiving, childbearing, and breastfeeding. Here it is wise to note that, sex role unlike gender role is not learned but are innate to human beings. Gender roles are socially constructed roles in which the society has defined and allocated to men and women, or boys and girls to perform a particular work in their community. Though they are classified by the sex of an individual, the classifications are based on the respected social norms. Based on this, in many traditional societies most domestic works were assigned for women, while those outdoor activities are reserved for men. But we should note that gender role may vary from culture to culture or place to place. Dear student, I hope that your answer is likely no for the first question in the above activity. This is because gender role and activities associated to children are created by the community's tradition, law and religion. Every society has an expectation of their children to behave, feel and act in certain ways simply because they are women or men. In most communities, women are expected to work household works while men are often expected to work outside the home and usually on tasks enables to generate income. Thus most of gender roles are passed down from parents to children. Children learn their gender role either from their parent treatments or by watching their parent roles closely. As children grow up, they accept these roles either because they want to please their parents or they perceived it as it has gifted to them naturally. 3. Gender and sex stereotype. In most traditional society, women and men are not perceived equally. Men are widely labeled as to be dominant, independent, aggressive, achievement-oriented and powerful, while females were widely believed to be nurturing, facilitative, less esteemed and physically weaker. The male muscular characteristics were considered to be healthy and good by society. On the contrary, the feminine characteristics were considered undesirable. Thus, gender stereotypes are simplistic generalizations about sex attributes, differences, and roles of individuals and/or groups. Though stereotypes can be positive or negative, it rarely communicates accurate information about others. So, gender stereotypes are an exaggerated generalization and false beliefs about male and female in the societies. Like that of gender role, in many traditional society women and men's sex role are not perceived equally. Thus some of the common perception that the society has developed on women's sex role are, as if women's bodies are shameful. Families had begun to teach their daughter about their body right in their teenagers. As she grows, she becomes curious about her body, but she is told that she should keep her sex organ hidden. But in reality all humans' bodies are not causes to be ashamed of, rather something to discover love and value. Women should not express unfold their sexual desire. Women are often thought that it is part of her duty as a wife to meet only her husband's sexual demand, while sexual desire is a natural part of a life for all sexes and women can feel sexual desire and pleasure like men. A woman belongs to men. In many societies, a woman is treated like the property of her husband and supposed to fulfill all her husband's demand. But everybody has his own body alone and should be able to decide how, when, with whom to share. Gender issue. Why does it matter for women? Gender issue is not only the concern of women issue. It refers to both men and women, but historically, there is a good reason why the emphasis of gender issue has been taken as only that of women's issue. Some of these reasons were, women have been suffered and still suffering in many parts of the world from the existing inequality than their counterpart men. Women have been the main actor in addressing the gender issue. Women are potentially untapped resources that contribute to economic development. Much development work is carried out in rural community by women. Many harmful gender practice which can be conducted in our society were largely exercised on women. Women as a result of such practice often deprived of their basic right to health, education, social services. Women issue left out of development process. Therefore these and other factors had probably brought about such feeling that gender is as a women's issue. So if gender is about women and men, then it is logical and reasonable to assume that the gender-based balance of power can't be changed by women alone. Indeed, It is possible to increase women's status, capacity and so on. But if men do not change their behavior, particularly if they refuse to share responsibility in the household, women are in the end faced with impossible choice of their triple role as careers, producer and household. This unfolds that gender issue is not only the concern of women issue. Gender identity development, its root cause. Gender identity is defined as a personal conception of oneself as male or female. The sources for gender differences may be stemmed from different sources. Some of sources identified by most psychologists are presented in the following section. A. Individual factor, children's own internal experience of gender identity formation. Some psychologists argued that children can construct gender by their own internal experiences. They call it a gender typing. Gender typing is the process by which children acquire the thought, feeling, and behavior that are considered appropriate for their gender in their culture. Santrock, 2002. This refers to the way children feel, think, and experience themselves as masculine and feminine. This means when it comes to them as what they feel or like, most children have developed an internal experience of their own masculinity and femininity. According to cognitive developmental theory of gender, children's gender typing occurs after they have developed a concept of gender. Once they constantly conceived as male or female, children often organize their world on the base of their gender, such as selecting same-sex models to imitate. In this view, children use physical and behavioral clues to differentiate gender role and to gender type themselves early in their development. This is because any deviation from this traditionally labeled masculine and feminine behavior may severely disapprove of them from their families. B. Cultural factors, practice, expectations and stereotypes of the society. 1. Cultural practice of the society. Culture and gender in our social world has a significant relationship, in which culture demands certain duties and behavior from men and women differently. Men are supposed to be masculine that have strength and skillful, while women are associated with passive and physically weaker. Many of research results also showed that the reflection of our society's culture exerts greater pressure on men to conform to a traditional male and women to conform to a traditional female. Culture can create gender disparity through its various traditional practices. Its customary practice like marriage, wife-beating, religious biases, cultural myths and taboos. 2. Adults' expectation. Children are also developing their gender identity from the adult's social expectation. Children are rewarded by adults when they are shown these differences throughout their development stages. Moreover, such socially constructed differences in the community has been reinforcing children in different sides, in which male are to have dominance on women while women as a group enjoys fewer rights and expected to exhibit different behavior than their counterpart male. 3. Social and environmental factors. According to social theory of gender, children construct their gender through observation and imitation from the behavior of their nearest social environments. Some of these social and environmental agents are as follows. A. Parental influences. According to social gender theorists, parents are the critical socializing agents in gender development and are sole sources through which children learn gender differences. In many of cultures, families discriminate between their child's sexes shortly after the infant's birth. Soon afterward, differences in hairstyle, clothes, and toys become obvious, which is rewarded these differences throughout their development stages. What they call this gender socialization. According to social psychologists, socialization is defined as the process by which adults provides children knowledge, skills and dispositions that enable them to participate as more or less effective members of a group and a society from their social agents. Sandrock, 2002. Thus, differential socialization of children based on their sex again induces differences in components of gender roles. A male child learns to conform to his own gender group by neglecting all activities that a girl child does. Accordingly, a male child becomes violent and plays hazardous games, keeps away from dolls and kitchen set, or else he would be branded a girl. Many psychologists argued that families are socially and psychologically important in children's gender development. Parents are often socializing their child through different ways. By the uses of reward and punishment, by their action or being a role model, engaging child in different types of play, role and activities. Parents can exert strong influences on their child through teaching their daughter to be feminine and sons to be masculine. As a result, they are engaged in different type of roles and are supposed highly to conform differently to existing cultural norms. On the other hand, according to Youth Hartley, families can socialize their children through 4 processes, namely, manipulation, canalization, verbal appellation and activity exposure. Manipulation refers to how a child handled. Boys are taken to be strong and girls are given more feminine designation of being pretty. Such experience on one's physique matters is very important in shaping the self-image and personality of boys and girls. Canalization involves the familiarization of boys and girls with certain objects, which later shapes their perceptions, aspirations and dreams. Well, we all know that anything that is pleasurable in the childhood becomes a memory to be cherished throughout their life. Verbal appellation. Most of the time parents' verbal persuasion has a significant impact on children's behavior. For instance, they are repeatedly using strong for boys and beautiful for girls. Activity exposure is the process in which it pertains to different kind activity, where boys and girls are exposed to. Girls are asked for help by their mothers and boys are usually accompanying their fathers outside the house. Peer influences. As parents provide the earliest discrimination of gender differences in our society, at latter stages, peers join the societal process of responding to and modeling masculine and feminine behaviors. Children show a clear preference for being with and liking same-sex peers as they go older and older. See school and teacher influences. In most cases both girls and boys receive an education that is not fair, in which boys are given the lion's share of attention in schools that is pressure to achieve is more likely to be heaped by their teacher on boys than girls on girls. Influences from media sources. Media has played its role on gender development either through dissemination of negative stereotypes about women or transmission of useful information about women. Most media has disseminating the images of women as housewives and are dependent to men, that is tends to undermine an accurate perception of real position of women in the societies. Thus, through media children are widely exposed to a myriad of models who display masculine and feminine behavior. This shows that children can actively construct their gender world from various media sources. The consequences of gender discrimination. It is obvious that every distinctions are not a discriminatory. For instances, the government may classify people into different groups for various and valid reasons, like for taxation. But, most of the time without any valid reasons, many discrepancies were observed in our societies. From these form of discrepancies, gender-based discrepancy is one form. so that a distinction can be constituted as a discriminatory when equal persons are treated differently on the basis of their natural characteristics like sex, color, race, etc. Due to the existence of these forms of prevalent misconception, today in many societies men are to be privileged in all public spheres while women are excluded and prevented from getting their fair share due to their sex differences. And it is becoming foremost of them as a lifelong sources of disappointment, frustration, tension and eventually downfall their relationships with men. According to Siegfried and others, gender differences in power, roles and rights can affect the health, fertility control, survival and nutrition of women by restricting them from access to health care, lowering control over their bodies and sexuality, and to using material and non-material resources. Women, due to their gender, are also restricted from accessing and controlling their own productive resources such as land, other social services like access to education, employment opportunities, basic health services, and others basic human rights. The gender division of labor at society level. Gender division of labor refers to the cultural work division in which men and women are assigned to different occupation and different level of rewarding. These socially constructed divisions of labor results in different rewards, statuses, opportunities for men and women. In our traditional societies, the division of labor is largely based on an individual gender. It was used as an efficient ways of ensuring the survival of family member and the societies. In this division of labor, men are in most societies tends to involved in outdoor works like in agriculture, business, mining etc., while women are tends to involved in domestics, household works, and subsistences works in the households. Dear student, such constructed role is not only limited to restricting women from those works but also it goes up to restriction in accessing to productive resources such as land, other social services like access to education, employment opportunities, basic health services, and protection of basic human rights. So that gender division of work is one of the indicators of the socio-economic marginalization of women in the country and is violence and harmful traditional practices that against women. Classification of gender labor division. As this contemporary society we can observe that there are two forms of structure of labor division performed by men and women in every part of the world: culture-based division and institutional-based division. A. Labor division by culture. Dear learner, by comparing your responses from the table, please try the following question. Are they engaged in similar roles / why or why not? Who are involved in the larger work load? What do you think to be done for minimizing the gap? Dear learner, although the activities you identified might be different from household to household, I hope that it may give you an important fact how gender division of labor in traditional society affects the women. In such traditional societies, women are engaged in a lot of activity each day, which result into overburdening women and makes their living worse than men. The average time for rural women may be as long as 18 hours. But it can be seen that men are engaged in less tasks throughout the day. In our traditional societies, the division of labor is largely based on an individual gender. It was used as an efficient ways of ensuring the survival of family member and the societies. In this division of labor, women are tends to involved in domestics, household works, and subsistences works in the households. That means women are the ones who are mostly working at home in the maintenance of the household or very close to home, doing both household activities and small-scale production and trading. By contrast, men are in most societies tends to involved in outdoor works like in agriculture, business, mining, etc. That is, it is inevitable that the men who work mostly away from home and are employed in better-paying jobs. This generally reveals that division of labor by gender is not only ascertaining gender gap, but also it is usually connected to freedom of work up to whether one has access to better income-generating employment or not. As a result, the place of work of men and women, in such context, is strongly associated with the level of autonomy and economic empowerment they have. These kinds of work division showed the environment in which men and women operate certain tasks are very wide than to their actual differences. On the basis this, Williams has argued that in the labor division by socio-cultural structure of a society, women roles are generally categorized into three: productive, reproductive, and community role. Productive roles are those accomplished for income generation through production of goods and services. Productive roles are heavily dominated by men. But both men and women can be involved in productive activities, but for most part, their function and responsibilities will differ according to the gender prescribed to them. That is, women productive work is often less visible and less valued. Reproductive activities involves the care and maintenance of the household and its members, including childbearing and nursing and food preparation, fetching water and wood collection, etc. In most cultures, reproductive activities are defined to be a responsibility and roles of women and crucial to human survival, yet it is seldom considered as a real work. Community role are those roles performed for the welfare of the general community, such as attending meetings, engaging on organization of social events and services, ceremonies and celebration, community improvement activities, local political activities, etc. Both men and women involved here, although a gender division of labor also prevails here. Dear student, when we are analyzing closely the role of women in both methods of divisions of labor works, they do have involved almost in all of the work. However, even though majority of the work burden fall on females, their labor is often less visible and less valued by their societies. B. Labor division in modern institutional structure. The current expansion of educational opportunity for women, together with social and other forms of development, have gradually brought some changes for the attitudes of society toward the role of women in public affairs. As a result, many educated women now have got a chance to join public affairs services. However, one of the areas of disparity between males and females is related to the difference in their employment status, which is manifested by occupational segregation, gender-based wage gaps, and women's disproportionate representation in informal employment, unpaid work and higher unemployment rates. The current experiences of the position and status of women in most institutional structure reveal that the traditional sex-gender work structure has been transformed in the same way that in the society. Thus, most of women in most organizations were assigned to work on petty work division like sanitation, cleric works, and reception. This seems that it is adding the fuel to the fire in the life of women. This because a shift of traditional sex division of work to this modern institutional structure was not only increased in the workload to women as they took role of men, but also they suffered a loss their status and power and control their labor as well. The loss of control over their labor in turn led them to be undermine their ability and their responsibilities. This shows that even today the productive capacity of women is captured by male-dominated culture in the contemporary institutions. And it also shows that women are not lost their power and autonomy in the village and in family by their traditional societies, but also they lost it in all other social areas. This means, in another word, the modern organizations also have turned their roads to the idea of traditional societies. Dear learner, the rationale of women chooses working outside their family is not only pure economic concern, rather it is seeking the power to controlling their labor. This made a woman to assume to regain what they incidentally had lost of the power and autonomy in their family, even though the reality they are facing is the reverse. On the other hand, what a women workers facing a problem is that they used all their income to fulfill their responsibility as a primary contributor to the family's well-being, as in the same way that in the traditional role, where they shouldered the responsibility of family maintenance. These cause them even to be highly burdened and overloaded with a lot of works than ever before. Although the joining of the women to the workforce is an appraisable progress which facilitates the appropriation of income generated by women, the increase of the double subsidy of women's workload on the other hand is another head of work as women. So generally, traditional beliefs or the culture underlying in most societies still make difficult for most women to enter the public realms of development, and yet they still face almost serious obstacles in decision-making position. Causes for gender division of labor. In many societies, the roles that men and women are expected to perform in their society is not based on their own choices. Rather, it was determined by various determinant factors. Some of them are: a society's tradition and beliefs, society's tradition, religion, and other societies' cultural myths and taboos are the most determinant factor of variation of gender roles performed in particular societies. Societies have many different norms, customs, and values that are passed from generation to generation. From the time we are tiny babies until to this time we learn and practice all roles that our societies prescribed for us. In order to perceive to be good by others, we start to learn how to do or behave. A job stereotypes. In most traditional societies, some group of work were widely labeled as to be dominant and have got high values simply without their actual value, while others were widely believed to be less valued and disregarded. For instance, working in domestic household activity was disregarded by many young people. As a result, most of the work performed at institutional level is filled by this type of stereotypes. Dear learner, if in your specific locality a husband performs only domestic or household activities and to the opposite a wife is engaged in outdoor activities, how do you think the societies view such reversed traditional role? Please debate on it. Every day we are confronted with thousands of different stimuli of job stereotypes, particularly from young peoples. Most of us are simply assigning some positive or negative image to some work, then have much less consider when we think about of it. Thus, once labels are assigned to it, they are remarkably difficult to abandon, even in the face of contradictory. According to cognitive developmental theory of gender, children's stereotyping occurs after they have developed a concept of gender. Once they constantly conceived as male or female, children often organize their world on the base of their gender, and they are trying to selecting works on basis similar sex models. In this view, children use physical and behavioral clues to differentiate gender role and selecting works that suits to them early in their development. This is because any deviation from this traditionally labeled jobs are severely disapproved by their societies. Such culturally transmitted assumptions of giving regards or disregarding work in such a manner in our societies it currently contributes to increasing the number of dependency risks in our societies. Mechanisms of combating traditional gender role-play activity. Dear teacher, please form 2 groups which contain 2 boys and 2 girls in each group. Then assign one group as a traditional household family and the other as modern household family. Then assign the first 2 students as husband and as wife, and the rest 2 of them as their son and daughter for each group. Then make first group to play a role of how a particular traditional household families would be expected to live, relate to each other and socialize their children in relation to the role and behavior that the society are expected them to perform. But make the remaining group to follow and play in similar procedure but in the reverse of the traditional role. Finally ask the class what they learn from the playing. Dear learner, these traditional gender-based roles may not be an easy task like this role-play activity presented to you. However, it may give us some hints of how we can confront the deep constructed and formidable attitudes of our society. Thus it is impossible to break this rational myth overnight or right now, it rather gradually. Because the concept about gender roles are some of the most deeply held in our societies and are difficult to erase it from the mind of people. If we want to change it urgently, we may encounter strong resistances. Dear student, from the previous discussions you have seen that gender issue is not only about women issue, rather it is the issues of both men and women. Therefore it is logical and reasonable to assume that the gender-based balance of power can't be changed by women alone. Indeed, it is possible to increase women's status, capacity and so on. But if men do not change their behavior, particularly if they refuse to share responsibility in the household, women are in the end faced with impossible choice of their triple role as careers, producer and household. But if men and women started to learn differently and take part on a new role, especially if they both exert effort in helping others to understand how these roles will help the whole society to live healthier life and more productive, these deep-rooted constructed roles will be easily eliminated from the societies. Dear student, however, it is important to point out that there are increasing numbers of men who recognize women's problem. Many of them will seek to assist or share burden of domestic work with their wives in spite of they often being ridiculed for doing so. So that this must be sustained and encouraged by societies and other concerned bodies. Gender and education. The issue of gender is central to all the development sectors including education. Gender roles and stereotypes affecting women in social life also reflected in education as well. As a result, there exists a gender disparity or gap in education sector. Dear student, why gender issues become an important issue within the education system? Dear student, the traditional perceptions of appropriate roles for men and women of the society are also becoming a great challenge in the school and workplace of education system. Thus gender issue is becoming one of the top agenda both for educational planner and development practitioners. While significant progress has been made in providing education for all, gender disparities continue to persist in enrollment, literacy, access and quality of education. As many research reports shows, there are several factors that causing a gender disparity or gap in education system. These are poverty, adverse cultural practice, distance to schools, gender-based violence, and other fragile factors. These and other related factors contributed to lower female enrollment rate and high dropout rates. In most cases, even at school level, both girls and boys receive an education that is not fair, in which boys are given the lion's share of attention. That is, the pressure to achieve is more likely to be heaped by their teacher on boys than on girls. Specifically, women are judged by how well they conform to traditional role than their actual performance. causes for gender disparity in education system and in career structure in Ethiopian context. Although enrollment ratios in primary education in many countries have increased considerably over the past 20 years, gender gaps remain relatively high in some parts of the world, including in our country. It was found that factors affecting girls' educational participation are multidimensional. That includes cultural, social, economic and institutional factors. The results of some research show that there are various factors that often keep girls away from school: parents are fearing for their security being raped or abducted, cultural expectation of girls to as a mother or wives, girls' work in the household and family is in most cases irreplaceable, and hence are preferred to their schooling. Girls' failure to achieve in the school system, which discourages many from continuing to attend school. And, schools are situated far from their home, where accommodation facilities are not easily available. The school curricula are most often not adapted to girls' needs and possibilities. Teachers are not use those methods recognize women's life experience in the classroom. As a result of these and other related factors, the participation of girls in education is generally low compared with male students. These all problem makes parents reluctant to send their daughters away from home to attend school. Similarly, there are some obstacle of sexists existed in many countries as regards to girls' and women's access to science education. The gender bias in all aspects, including in science education, is also a critical problem today. A number of studies indicate that by the onset of adolescence, girls are already biased against technical subjects and careers. So their own biases are compounded by the biases of their parents, and the masculine content of the subject matter itself, and the predominance of men in the learning, the study and working environment related to the subject area are also factors alienating women from science education. However, by mere making such subjects available for girls in schools do not enable to overcome the problem of women from traditional male fields of science education. Therefore, as it was launched in most of the countries, to tackle the problem from its root, some specific project activity would be designed for them. These may include designing more gender-sensitive curricula, textbooks and teacher training program. Besides to these, other factors, like cultural women's, and girls', multiple tasks and duties should be taken into account to develop the national education systems in response to the changing educational needs of girls. In addition, its contents must address women's productive, reproductive and civic responsibilities as well. Significance of accessing education to women, dear student. Despite the above factors, education plays a key role in women's life at the individual level and at the societal level at large. Increase in education has often been cited as one of the major avenues through which women are empowered. It is generally believed that educating women is educating a nation, as it benefits all. Education increases the upward socio-economic mobility of women, creates an opportunity for them to work outside the home, and enhances husband-wife communication. It is increasingly recognized that education offers the best tool for empowering poor women, especially those in rural areas and urban slums, because it is responsive to learners' urgent needs and immediately useful. Providing an access of education for women is important for the individual women, primarily for the following reasons. It brought to girls to have more life choice and opportunities to participate in community life and decision-making. It causes women to tend to marry later and have fewer, healthier and better nourished children. It yields for women the highest return in economic terms. It makes women to have more exposure to information. It makes women to resist domestic violence more likely. On the other hand, providing an access of education for women has important for the larger society as it reduced women's fertility rates. It lowers infant and child mortality. It increases women labor force participation rates and earning. Some measures taken by the Ethiopian government to increase the enrollment of female students: 1. The implementation of Affirmative Action Program is the program that is designed to act upon the long-standing problems of dropping out and repeating of girls, and above all helps to create conducive environment that ensures the continuity of education of disadvantaged girls. Its main purposes are to increase enrollment of female students in the educational institutions at different levels, to encourage other female students to continue their education, to encourage parents and the community to send their daughters to school. 2. Increasing number of construction of school. The expansion of school with increase in the construction of schools in the rural areas of the states is helping girls to attend classes near their localities. 3. Increasing the number of female teachers. Dear student, the only way to rescue women from the above oppressive practices is to sensitize them through increasing the number of female teachers in the school, which will bring awareness for the society as a general, and women for a particular. Therefore, the weapon that emancipates women from such rational thought at this stage is education. In general, the arrangement of tutorial class for female students, and awareness-raising activities are among the measures taken by the government to increase the number of female students and encourage them to remain in school. Gender policies, strategies and development approaches. This section of the unit is starting its focus on gender equality and then proceeds to a historic movement of policy development approach at global level and looking into the addressing issues of women with integrating in development processes so as to both sexes are able to equally contribute to their society's development. Gender equality and gender equity, what is the difference? Dear student, the concept of equality is relatively a modern construct, though it was born from Aristotelian notion that likes should be treated alike. Hence equality is not only an economic, social or political requirement for human development, but also it includes more of others essential elements that are realizing the full potential of life to be lived as a member of a community and for progress towards meeting the needs of mankind. Gender equality, as defined in UN Convention, is equality between men and women, entails the concept that all human beings, both men and women, are free to develop their personal abilities and make choices without the limitations set by stereotypes, rigid gender roles and prejudices. This means that the different behavior, aspirations and needs of women and men are considered, valued and favored equally. It does not mean that women and men have to become the same, but that their rights, responsibilities and opportunities will not depend on whether they are born male or female. Gender equity means fairness of treatment for women and men, according to their respective needs. This may include equal treatment or treatment that is different but which is considered equivalent in terms of rights, benefits, obligations and opportunities. So that the struggle of gender equity is not a struggle between women and men, but it is a struggle to change social structure and attitude in societies. Gender approach is the attempt made to give equal opportunity to men and women, where men are made to share their burden and women are recognized as equal partners. It is one of the tools used to deal to eliminate gender out of a development and adopting valid policy that makes life easier for women and brings a radical change to women, which in turn helping them to drop out their initial gender tasks. So that through designing appropriate policy we can ascertain and approaches the gender inequality and its impacts on developmental activities. This shows how the issues of gender inequality are actually addressed depends upon the quality of policy direction had been envisaged by the states. The global movement on gender equality and development approaches. The concept of equality is relatively a modern construct, though it was born from Aristotelian notion that likes should be treated alike. But the question concerning women equality and their role and the development have been brought before international arena with the establishment of UN in 1945. However, until 1970s policies and planners of nations were virtually ignoring the economic role of women. Most of the policies and plans were either based on men and generalized to all people, or it prescribed men as they are the only assumed breadwinner and women as to their dependents. The dominant view of that time was women's role as restricted to household activities for which women were stereotypically labeled. But after 1970s onwards, priority was started to be given for women in aggregating them in the development policies of states. It was recognized by both UN Charter and UN Declaration of Human Rights Bill and the majority of development planning of many nations. However, significant challenges were still remained, indicating that different approaches are needed to address these opportunities and challenges within the platform's vision of gender equality and women's empowerment. Policy interventions to minimize the risks of women as well as to ensure the most positive outcomes for women throughout their life must be designed by each nation. This because difficulties encountering women, who are constituting over half of the world's population, in entering, pursuing and advancing in a career of development and in participating in decision-making in employment areas should be addressed urgently through states' policy approach. Some of the major globally recognized gender policy approaches. Dear student, at global level different policy approach were frameworked in attempting to address the women's issue in development process. There were two main approaches implemented by UNESCO WID and WOD. The Women in Development WID, approach, is an approach of 1970s and focused on how women could be better integrated into the existing male-made world and corresponding development initiatives. Targeting women's productive work to the exclusion of their reproductive work, this approach was characterized by income-generating projects for women who failed to address the systemic causes of gender inequality. It seeks to integrate women into development by making more resources available to women and increase their effort to increase women's efficiency in their existing roles. Very often this approach has increased women's workload, reinforced inequality and widened the gap between men and women. The WID approach tended to view women as passive recipients of development assistance, rather than as active agents in transforming their own economic, social, political and cultural realities. A key outcome was that women's concerns were viewed in isolation, as separate issues, leading to their marginalization in the state system and other social structures. The Gender and Development (GAD) was proposed in the process leading to the Beijing Conference, 1995. The Gender and Development approach seeks to integrate gender awareness and competence into mainstream development, while recognizing that development activities may affect women and men differently. Due to sexual differences as well as historic circumstances, and therefore emphasizing the need to apply appropriate gender planning in order to ensure that the resulting conditions and results are equitable to women and men. This approach recognizes that women and men have different and special needs. and they do not constitute a homogeneous group. Attempts in most countries are increasingly being focused on involving an approach to development based on bottom-up initiative and self-reliance of women in development. Such endeavor have resulted in transformation from that of welfare-oriented policy approach which was assumed women as passive beneficiaries to empowerment policy approach which aimed at helping women to help themselves through their active participation. Thus, dear student, 5 major framework policy approaches have been identified by Morse, 1989, to involve women in the development, which were recognized by many states in their development policy today. A. The welfare approach. The welfare policy approach was initiated at global level during the 1950-1970s. Before this period, women's issue in development was subsumed under questions of human rights and they were also viewed as objects or property of their family or husband. Thus the premises of this approach is women like children, the disabled and old-aged people, are special group that requires certain personal welfare services to enhance their contribution in their contemporary societies. The needs of this welfare service were arisen from their traditional subordinate social status and aimed to supporting them as motherhood which is as the important role for women in society and relieving them also from suffering. According to this approach the causes of hindering women in development is the existence traditional patriarchy, structure exploitation, subordination and operation of women by men. This approach is laid down on the principle of giving special help for women means helping the whole family. It also considers women as passive recipients of development assistance, rather than as active agents in transforming their own economic, social, political and cultural realities. However, even though it has these shortcomings, it is still widely used in many countries' development program and women as wives and mothers are responsible for the health and well-being of the whole family. B. The equity approach. This approach has got popularity during 1975-85. The aim of this approach is to gain equity for women in development by grafting gender into the development process. During this period there has been a growing trend towards seeing women as agent and beneficiary in all sectors at all levels of the development process. It is the outcome of the application of welfare approaches. This is because the view in the concept of welfare approach has a tendency to overload women's role with merely of a welfare concern which can hamper the viewing of women as the progressive forces that they are. In the welfare approach women's concerns were treated in isolation, as separate issues, is leading them to be marginalization in the state system and other social structures. Thus by criticizing the welfare approach, the equity approach was initiated for considering women as a contributor for societies and they should be changed from their welfare role to a major contributor of their society's development. According to this approach women in general tend to be disadvantaged compared to men in terms of their access to and control of the means of production, than that of their welfare's problem in general and also as self-sufficiency are preferable to dependency, so equal role and activities should be given priority over welfare approach. That is their potential as an individual agent can only be actualized when they treated equally with their counterpart men so that recognizing women as agent of social change must be the starting point. In order to gain equity for women in development and grafting gender into development process, policymakers should focus on participation methods which reform the existing structure in the society. C. The anti-poverty approach. This approach has got popularity during the period of 1970s whereby women were started to be viewed as useful resources to reduce poverty and they become more widely recognized. This approach assumed women's role as a crucial for development. Its goal were integrating women into development or recognition of the productive role of women, that is, raising production in development, poor women ensured to increase their productivity. The premise of this approach is that women in development policy constitute a key variable in the socio-economic condition of any country, that it can be the decisive in the success or failure of development plan. Thus, it is crucial to move beyond women's initial role to taking an active role in providing leadership to ensure that women have access to the opportunity and benefits of economic development. This approach also viewed that privileging men within sex-gender system contributes to the inequitable development that disadvantages not only women but also men as well. According to this approach, the causes of women's problem is not only their low status, rather their lack to access and controlling resources, and low standard of living. So by training women in technical skill, we can enable them to participate in small scale of income generating activities, which enable them to meet their basic needs. Though poverty is a general concern of society which affects both men and women, it becomes more a women's concern when women have shouldering their main responsibility of ensuring the welfare of children. Poverty becomes a women's issue because they do not receive a fair share of the fruit of their labor. D. The efficiency approach. This approach received popularity in post-1980s and still is the most popular approach in most nations' policy. Before 1980s, women have been left out of development process. For a development to work better, women's participation in development had to be assured by targeting projects to them. If women had more equally opportunity with men, they could catch up with men to become more economically self-sufficient. This approach is different from the rest approach in that women are working not only to pin money, rather for viewing themselves as a competent person to make an economic contribution to a national production. So the problem was not that women did not participate in development. They were always participated in development and had performing a lot of work in the development. But the problem was that they were not consulted directly about their needs and were marginalized out of the decision-making processes. This approach has seen women role as critical resources for development. Failure by development planner to recognize women's role in production and necessity to involve women equally with men are considered to be the causes for development inequality. Hence, to ensure development is more efficient and more effective, programs that rely on the role of women and elasticity of time are mandatory. E. The empowerment approach. Empowerment approach is a recent form of gender political and policy practice approach. It, as a form of promoting women's rights, was initiated by a group of feminists in the 1970s, and later appeared in the UN Third World Conference on Women in Nairobi, 1985. The concept appeared in the UN debate regarding the status of women and on their role in development. This policy approach was designed to address women's issue in terms of their triple role through bottom-up mobilization to confront oppression. According to this approach, there are an invisible barrier arising from a complex set of structures of male-dominated organizations which prevents women from obtaining top positions in management and administration. Thus, this pervasive obstacle to women's access to decision-making must be addressed in the empowerment approach. The concept of gender empowerment was seen as a means of promoting the role of women in the field of development and of integrating women's values into development work. And through empowerment, women are enabled to be participated actively, build solidarity, overcome fear. This is because women in any society are often finding it difficult to speak in the male-dominated society. Therefore, it is important to devise ways of enabling their voice to be heard. Empowering women through enabling them as a self-reliant person, it means that building a new political, economic and social structure in the society. That is to challenge or to overcome exploitive structure from the society. Women should have empowered as they able to address their own problem by their own selves. Thus, the important thing to understand about the empowerment is that, in a sense, no one can empower anyone else. In the same way, if we took it in relation to development, true empowerment is achieved by women themselves. This would enable them to have the power to make meaningful choice and changes in their lives. Thus we can say that empowerment is a tool that seeks to advance gender equality by revising all mainstreaming policy areas. It is simultaneously intended as a way of improving the effectiveness of mainstreaming policies by making visible the gendered nature of assumptions, process and outcomes in the development sphere. National Experiences of Gender Policy Approach. Dear learner, the problems of gender inequalities discussed above are very much prevalent in and relevant to Ethiopia. Since Ethiopian are a patriarchal society that keeps women in a subordinate position. Until recently, governments in Ethiopia have not had any policy on women's affairs. Hence women have not been seen as important potential beneficiaries of government development programs. Thus, the country had adopted various international agreements to promote gender equality and improve the lives of women since very recently. The National Policy on Women, introduced in 1993, was the first policy that is specifically related to the affairs of women. It was aimed to improve the level of income of women by facilitating opportunities and woman-friendly conditions in the workplace, to improve the health and nutrition of mothers and their children and to upgrade and improve their education. The policy include facilitating conditions conducive to the speeding up of equality between men and women so that women can participate in the political, economic and social life of their country on equal terms with men. Ensuring that their right to own property as well as their other human rights are respected and that they are not excluded from both the enjoyment of the fruits of their labor or performing public functions and participating in decision-making. This policy is based on the principles of the Women in Development (WID) approach. Its aim is to assist socially and economically vulnerable women to benefit from the increasingly expanding economy and private sector opportunities. It will seek to improve the standard of living of women and contribute to poverty alleviation. Addressing the constraints to implementing the national policy on women and supporting the establishment of grassroots women's organizations will build women's ability to organize themselves to effectively voice their concerns and preferences about their economic, social and civic rights. Dear learner, as a means to implementing these global agreements, Ethiopia has been enacted different policies and legislations. Some of these are the National Population Policy, Education Policy, Cultural Policy, and other legal documents. The National Population Policy. This policy was endorsed in 1993, included in its objectives women's status and health issues such as reduction of incidence of maternal mortality, improvement of females' participation at all levels of education and enhancement of the contraceptive prevalence rate. Education and Training Policy. This policy was enacted to affirm the importance of girls' education. It focused on the reorientation of the attitude and values of the society towards recognizing the roles and contributions of women in development. The policy included gender equality issues such as increasing girls' school enrollment ratio, preparing a gender-sensitive curriculum, and reducing girls' dropout and repetition rates, FDRE, 1994. Besides to these, in Ethiopia successful educational policies have demonstrated practical understanding of household gender sensitivities. For example, there were programs that encourage girls to go to school, typically constructing school at their nearest local level, so that parents have less reason to favor boys over girls. Improve school sanitation facilities to allow appropriate privacy for girls and hire female teachers to increase girls' school enrollment. The National Cultural Policy. This policy was enacted in 1997, in attempts to address the customary practicing backward tradition that undermined the role of women in society. The main objectives of this policy are to ensure equal participation in and benefit from cultural activities, and to abolish traditional harmful practices that violate the rights of women such as early marriage, female genital mutilation and abduction, FDRE, 1997. Dear learner, in addition to the aforementioned national policies, gender equality is guaranteed by the Constitution of the country. Article 25 of the FDRE Constitution stated that all people are equal before the law and prohibit any discrimination on grounds of gender. In Article 35, equality in matters related to employment, equality in acquisition and management of property, equal participation in policy and decision-making, and right of women to plan families are stated to ensure gender equality. Similarly, Article 42 states the right of female workers to equal pay for comparable work, FDRE, 1995. Dear learner, despite the fact that the country adopted global agreements and endorsed country-specific laws and policies, there are gaps and limitations in implementation, as a result of which the status of women in the country remained very low as discussed in the first part. It is imperative, therefore, to revisit policy implementation strategies and programs, identify problem areas and take appropriate action for improvement. Activity 1. Discuss the major achievements registered in the different gender development approaches. 2. Explain the gender policy of the Ethiopian government. 3. What is the major tenets of gender empowerment approaches? 4. When Ethiopia does launch gender policy in attempting to address the women's issue in development process.